They kissed me goodbye like they'd be back before midnight. They smelled like cedar wood and expensive suits, and the particular warmth that only ever meant home to me. Jahan straightened his cuffs and told me not to wait up. Jayan kissed my stomach, both hands gentle, lips pressed soft against the curve of our children, and whispered, "We'll be back before they kick again." Jaso was last. He held my face in both hands, thumbs brushing my cheekbones, and looked at me the way he sometimes did, like he was memorizing something. "Lock the doors," he said. "I always do," I said. He kissed my forehead, held it one beat too long, then he let go, and they were gone. I didn't know, standing at that window, watching their taillights disappear into Seoul's glittering dark, that I had exactly 4 hours left to live. I didn't know that the man who brought me chamomile tea that morning had already given someone else the door codes. I didn't know that my body carried a power I'd never been told about. Something ancient, something desperate, something that only wakes when a life is ending and another one hasn't yet begun. All I knew was that the bondmark on my neck felt strange, tight, like a fist closing. I pressed my fingers to it, standing at the window, and told myself it was just the pregnancy. I was wrong, and so were they. The apartment had never felt so quiet. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of our 42nd floor penthouse in Gangnam, one hand pressed flat against the cold glass, watching Seoul breathe below me. The Han River caught the city lights and fractured them into 1,000 moving pieces. Gold and white, and the deep arterial red of traffic signals bleeding their colors across the water. 7 months. That's how far along I was. 7 months of our children growing inside me, shifting and kicking and communicating in that secret language that only I could feel. 3 distinct personalities already, even now. One who pressed against my ribs when he was restless. One who settled low and heavy, calm and still, like he was already thinking. One who kicked precisely when I was anxious, as if reminding me to breathe. "Breathe, Jihan." I pressed my palm harder against the glass. The bond mark on the left side of my neck had been doing something odd all evening. Not the usual warm pulse of 3 alphas moving through the world. That familiar triple thread hum I'd lived with for 2 years. The sensation of Jaehan's focus. Jaeseo's steadiness. Jayun's warmth braided together into something that felt like home inside my nervous system. This was different, tighter, almost like the bond was contracting, pulling itself inward, conserving something, or warning of something, I wasn't sure which. "You're being dramatic," I told myself. "It's the 3rd trimester. Everything feels amplified." I'd told Jaiseo this when he'd held my face before leaving. He'd looked at me with those careful eyes, the ones that always seemed to be running calculations behind their warmth. And I'd seen something flicker there, a hesitation, a question he didn't ask. "Lock the doors," he'd said instead. I moved away from the window and lowered myself onto the long sectional sofa, our babies shifting in protest at the change of position. I breathed through it, that particular pressure without pain that came with carrying 3, and reached for the remote. The apartment was immaculate and enormous and absolutely empty. Chansu had left an hour ago. Our head of household security, 11 months of chamomile tea in the morning, and gentle, "How are you feeling today, Jihansi?" And remembering that I didn't like the overhead lights after 8 p.m., switching them to the warmer side lamps without being asked. He'd said everything before leaving. The lamps, the temperature, a plate of the sliced Korean pear I'd been craving for 3 weeks on the kitchen island, with a small note in his precise handwriting. "For when you're hungry. Rest well tonight." And I'd smiled at that note. I smiled at it again now from across the room, though I couldn't read it from the sofa. The television came on. I muted it almost immediately. I didn't want noise. I wanted the particular texture of this silence, the kind that belonged to an apartment that held the ghost warmth of 3 people who just left it. Their scents were still here, cedarwood and dark amber and something cold and clean like winter air. Jaehan, warm sandalwood and old books. Jiseo, rain on stone, bright and slightly sweet. Jayun. I breathed them in. They'll be home before the babies kick again. That's what Jayun had promised, lips pressed to my stomach, voice soft in the way he reserved only for me and for the 3 lives we'd made together. Jayan, who cried at the first ultrasound, ugly. It shocked tears that he immediately tried to deny, and who had since developed the habit of narrating his day to my stomach on the theory that early voice recognition was scientifically supported. I smiled at the ceiling. Then I felt it. The bond mark pulled. Hard. A single sharp contraction, like a rubber band stretched to its limit and snapped. Not painful, but startling in its intensity, and followed immediately by a low, vibrating unease that settled into my chest like smoke. I sat up. What was that? I pressed my fingers to the mark. It was warm. Too warm. The triple thread hum had shifted. I could still feel all 3 of them, the faint, distant pulse of the alphas at the far end of the bond. But something had changed in the texture of it. Something had gone flat, like one instrument in a chord dropping slightly out of tune. And I picked up my phone. Jahan's name was at the top of my contacts, always. I pressed call. It rang twice. 3 times. Voicemail. This is Quan Jahan. Leave a message. His voice on the recording, clipped, professional, exactly as warm as he allowed himself to be in context where warmth might be observed, made something tighten in my throat. I didn't leave a message. I called Yeseo instead. 4 rings. Voicemail. Jayun. 3 rings. Voicemail. I set the phone down on the cushion beside me and watched it for a moment. They're in the middle of the banquet. Of course they're not answering. This is the Shin-Quan merger negotiation. 3 years of groundwork, 47 billion won on the table. Every major syndicate head and soul in one room. Of course they can't pick up. I knew all of this. I understood all of this. And the bond mark pulled again. Tighter. I picked up the phone and called Jahan again. 41 floors below and 12 kilometers northwest, in the private dining level of the Grandium Tower in central Gangnam, the most dangerous room in Seoul was performing the elegant theater of legitimate business. The Kwan triplets occupied one side of a table long enough to seat 16, dressed in identical charcoal suits that were not identical at all to anyone who looked closely. Jahan's cut military sharp. Jaeseo's with the slight relaxation of a man who dressed for comfort within power. Jaeun's with the particular tailoring that made him look younger than his brothers, and therefore perpetually underestimated. They were 29 years old. They had inherited their father's syndicate at 22 and tripled its territory in 7 years, when there was not a shipping container, a construction contract, or a political appointment in Seoul's underground economy that didn't carry their mark. Tonight was the coronation. The Shin family, old money, new ambition, enough lawyers to constitute their own judicial system, sat across the table with the careful composure of people who had already accepted that they were not equals in this room, but were determined to negotiate as if they were. Jahan led. He always led. The eldest by 4 minutes, a fact he carried like 4 decades, with a stillness that the room organized itself around. When Jahan went quiet, other men filled the silence carefully, like they were placing objects on a scale they couldn't afford to tip. Jaso flanked his right, documents open before him, the quiet architecture of their operation visible in how his eyes moved. Reading every face, every micro-expression, every shift in body language that might signal a renegotiation tactic. Jaeseo was the one who noticed things, who always had. Jayan sat to Jahan's left. One arm rested loosely on the table, with the practiced ease of someone who used charm the way other people use weapons, because it was more efficient and left fewer visible marks. The evening had been proceeding with the smooth inevitability of a deal that both parties knew was already done. Then Shin Do-yoon, patriarch, 70 years old, the kind of man who wore his silver hair like a crown, set down his whiskey glass and let his gaze move, deliberately to the faint vibration visible in Jahan's jacket pocket. "You're Omega," Shin Do-yoon said pleasantly, conversationally, like he was observing the weather. "He calls often." The table went still in that particular way that rooms do when something sharp has been said in a soft voice. Jahan's expression didn't change. "He's in his 3rd trimester." "Of course," Shin Do-yoon smiled. "Still, a bonded alpha who cannot silence his personal affairs during a business negotiation." He let the sentence trail, which was worse than finishing it. One wonders about focus, about priorities. Jaehyun's hand, loose on the table, curled slightly. Jaeso's eyes moved to Jaehan. Something moved across Jaehan's face. Too fast to name, too real to hide entirely. It wasn't anger. It was worse than anger. It was the particular wound of a proud man being told that the thing he loves is making him look small. Jaehan reached into his jacket pocket. Jaeso saw what he was about to do, felt it a half second before it happened. That premonition that came from 29 years of sharing space with someone. He opened his mouth. He didn't speak. He didn't know why. Later, he would spend a long time not knowing why. Jaehan's thumb moved across the screen. Block contact. The vibration stopped. The bond mark on Jaehan's neck went from insistent pulse to a dull, manageable ache, like pressing a bruise until the sharper pain faded into something he could set aside. He'd deal with it later. He'd explain later. Jaehan would understand. Jaehan always understood the demands of this life, had chosen this life with open eyes, had never. Now, Jaehan said, his voice returning to its usual register. Controlled, final, the voice that ended arguments before they began. He reached for his own glass. Where were we? Shin Do-yoon smiled. Jaehyun looked at his own hands. Jaeso looked at nothing, jaw tight and said nothing, and hated himself for it with the quiet fury of someone who already knew they'd regret this. I called 7 times. 7 times I pressed Jaehan's name and listened to 2 rings before voicemail. Then Jaeseo, 4 rings, voicemail. Then Jaehyun, straight to voicemail now, which meant the phone was off, or I stared at my screen. Contact blocked. The words sat there in gray text, clinical and absolute. I read them 3 times. Then I set the phone face down on the cushion and pressed both hands flat against my stomach and made myself breathe. It's a mistake. It's a pocket block. Jaehan does this sometimes accidentally when he puts his phone away without looking. It's not deliberate. He wouldn't. The bond mark burned. Not the tightening warning of before. This was different. This was hot. A sudden flush of heat across the left side of my neck that made me gasp and press my fingers to the mark. Through the bond I could feel them. Distantly. The way you feel music from another apartment. Present but muffled. And what I felt from Jaehan's thread was something I recognized. Pride. Wounded and steeled. The particular emotional configuration of a man who has just been made to feel small and is compensating by making himself larger. He blocked me to look strong. I sat with that knowledge for a moment. Then I heard the sound from the balcony. It was small, almost nothing. The particular click of a latch, the kind of sound an apartment makes when it's settling, when the wind catches something, and when a door opens from the outside. I was on my feet before the thought completed itself. 7 months pregnant and moving with an instinct that bypassed thought entirely. Pure biological alarm, the body's knowledge arriving faster than the mind's. I grabbed my phone from the cushion, pressed Jaehan's number. Contact blocked. Jaeseo. The number you have dialed, Jaehyun. The number you have dialed. I stood in the center of the living room and looked at the balcony door. It was closed. The latch was in the wrong position. In 11 months, Chan-soo had always checked the balcony latch before leaving. It was on his security checklist. I had seen him do it. I had seen him do it this evening, running through his list while I watched from the kitchen island. And I was certain I had seen him push that latch down. It was up. I tried Oh Hyo-jin, my friend, the only person outside this apartment I had called in months, and she picked up on the second ring, her voice warm and slightly confused because I never called this late. Jihan? Something's wrong, I said. My voice was very quiet. I need you to stay on the line. A pause, then, without asking questions, because Hyojin had never once required an explanation to show up for me. I'm here. I'm not hanging up. I moved toward the bedroom. The panic button was behind the headboard. Jaehan had installed it himself, had walked me through the procedure twice, had said, press it and 12 men will be here in 4 minutes. Do you understand? 4 minutes. 4 minutes. If I could reach it. The living room light went out. Not a flicker. Not a circuit fault. It was a deliberate cut, the entire apartment dropping into darkness except for the city light bleeding through the windows and the glow of my phone screen. Jihan! Hyojun's voice in my ear, tighter now. Jihan, what's happening? The lights, I said. I heard them then. Footsteps, more than one, moving with the specific quiet of training, the silence that isn't natural but learned. From the balcony, and I realized with a cold drop of certainty, from the service entrance at the far end of the hallway. Two entry points, simultaneous. They had the codes. The understanding hit me like cold water. They hadn't broken in. There was no forced entry, no alarm triggered, no 12 men coming in 4 minutes because the security system wasn't screaming. It was sleeping. Someone had put it to sleep. Someone who knew how. Hyojin, I said, moving through the darkness toward the bedroom, one hand on the wall, one hand pressed to my stomach. My voice was very calm. I noted distantly that this was shock, the particular clarity that arrives when fear becomes too large for the body to process conventionally. If you don't hear from me in 10 minutes, call the Quan main line, not their personal numbers. The main line, tell them. A figure stepped out of the hallway shadow, then another, then a third, black-clad, faces covered, moving with the unhurried confidence of people who knew their target had no one coming. I ran, I fought. I want to say that clearly. I want whoever finds these words to know that I did not simply wait. I was 7 months pregnant and alone, and I fought. I threw the ceramic lamp from the bedside table, connected with something, heard a grunt. Bought myself 3 seconds. I reached the panic button, pressed it again. Nothing. Disabled, like everything else. I used my phone, called the building security desk. The line rang and rang and rang into silence. I pressed myself against the far wall of the bedroom, between the window and the wardrobe, and I looked at the 3 figures filling the doorway, and I felt something I had never felt before. Not fear exactly, though fear was present, but a particular species of grief. The grief of someone who has called for help and received only the sound of their own voice returning. I called 7 times, I thought. I called 7 times and they chose not to come. One of them spoke. The voice was male, unhurried, with the flat affect of someone performing a job rather than expressing a feeling. Don't make this difficult, and the children will survive. That's not what we're here for. Just you, the unspoken end of that sentence said. Just you. Who sent you? I said. It wasn't quite a question. The man tilted his head. Does it matter? And the terrible thing was that in that moment, phone in my hand, bondmark burning, 3 strangers between me and the only exit. I thought about the note on the kitchen island, the handwriting I'd smiled at an hour ago. For when you're hungry, rest well tonight. Chansu. The understanding arrived not as a revelation, but as a quiet, devastating confirmation. The kind where part of you already knew, had already filed the evidence somewhere you hadn't looked yet. The balcony latch, the alarm codes, the timing, leaving early enough to be gone before this, late enough to have set everything in motion. He Chansu made the tea this morning, some part of me thought. He asked how the babies were kicking. The man moved forward. I had nowhere to go. I pressed both hands to my stomach, the last instinctive gesture of someone protecting what matters most, and looked at the window, at Seoul glittering and indifferent beyond the glass, at the Han River catching light 42 floors below. Jae-han, I thought. Not a call, not a plea. Just his name, the way you say something you're losing. Jae-seo, Jae-yun. The knife was fast, I'll give them that. Cold, then warm, then the floor. The marble was cold against my cheek. I could see my phone, screen lit, Hyojin's name still on the call. Could hear her voice from very far away, saying my name, saying it again, the sound growing distant as something large and quiet moved into the room with me. And the bondmark flared, not burning now, screaming, a biological howl, the bond ripping itself apart at the seams, severing from one end while the other end remained connected and alive and alone. My hand found my phone. My last thought was not about dying. It was about the 3 lives inside me who hadn't yet taken their first breath. Not them, I thought, with everything I had left. Please, not them. The bond mark went white, and time broke. There is no word for it in any language I know. The closest I can come is this. Imagine every moment you have ever lived compressed into a single point of light. And then imagine that point pulled backward through itself, like a thread unraveling from the end, rewinding through the weave until it reaches a place where it can begin again. I don't experience the rewind, I experience the landing. One moment I am on the floor, cold marble against my cheek, soul glittering through the window above me, the sound of Hyojin's voice going underwater. The next moment, I am on the sofa. The apartment is lit, warm lit, the lamps of Chansu set before leaving, the overhead lights off. The television is on and muted, the same channel I'd turned to an hour ago. My phone is on the cushion beside me, screen dark. The kitchen island, I look immediately, instinctively, holds a white ceramic plate, sliced Korean pear, a folded note. For when you're hungry, rest well tonight. I press both hands to my stomach. The babies move, all three of them, the restless one, the calm one, the anxious one, shifting and present and alive. I am shaking. I press my hands flat and feel them and count the movements and breathe with a deliberateness that is the only thing standing between me and complete collapse. Because the alternative to breathing is whatever the thing is that wants to come out of my chest right now. The sound or the grief or the knowledge, the terrible knowledge of what just happened to my body on a floor in this apartment. I died. I sit with that for 37 seconds. I count them. 37 seconds of sitting completely still on this sofa in this lit apartment, feeling three babies move inside me, acknowledging the sentence. I died, and then I didn't. And now I remember. I remember all of it. The cold, the floor, the way the bond mark screamed, the understanding about Chansu arriving too late to be useful, the man's voice. The children will survive. Wesh, that's not what we're here for. And before all of that, contact blocked. I pick up my phone. I look at Jahan's name. I press call. It rings twice. Voicemail. This is Kwan Jahan. I hang up. I look at the time. I have approximately, I calculate, backward from when the balcony door opened, when the lights cut, 2 hours, maybe slightly less. 2 hours before they come back. This time they'll find something different waiting. I sit for another moment. Then I stand up, move to the kitchen, and drink a full glass of water standing at the sink, looking at Chansu's note. Rest well tonight. I fold the note carefully and put it in my pocket. Then I begin to prepare. I called Hyojin. She answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been waiting. Which meant some part of her had felt something in the hours since we'd last spoken. The intuition that moves between people who have been close for a long time. Jihan, she said immediately. Are you okay? I had this feeling. I need you to listen to me very carefully, I said. And I need you to not ask me to explain everything right now. I'll explain everything later. Right now, I need you to stay on the phone with me for the next 2 hours, and I need you to not hang up no matter what you hear. Silence then. Okay. Just that. Okay. 11 years of friendship compressed into one syllable. There are people coming to this apartment tonight, I said. I know when. I know how they're getting in. I know who helped them. Jahan, I'm not leaving. I said it quietly, the way you say something that has already been decided. That was never really a question. I'm not leaving because there's nowhere to go where they won't follow, and because I pressed my hand flat against my stomach. Because I'm done waiting for someone else to handle the things that threaten what's mine. A longer silence. When Hyojin spoke again, her voice was careful and steady. What do you need me to do? Stay on the line, I said. And if I go quiet for more than 5 minutes, call the Kwan main line. Not their personal numbers. They're blocked. I heard her breath catch at that. She knew what blocked meant. She knew enough of this life to understand what it meant for an Omega, 7 months pregnant, to call his Alpha 7 times and receive nothing back. She didn't comment on it. I'll stay, she said. I set the phone on the kitchen counter with the call still running. Hyojin's soft background sounds. Her cafe. Quiet at this hour. the low hum of a refrigerator, a thread connecting me to something outside this apartment, outside this night. Then I looked at my hands, and I thought about what had happened when I died. I need to explain this carefully because I don't fully understand it myself. When the bond mark went white, in those last seconds on the floor, when the severing began, something moved through me that had no frame of reference in anything I'd been taught about omegas, about bonds, about what our biology was and wasn't capable of. It wasn't pain, it was beyond pain. It was the sensation of every connection I had ever felt, the triple thread of the bond, the three lives inside me, the fragile thread of my own continuity, being pulled tight until the frequency changed into something else entirely, something that flowed outward instead of inward. In my last moment, I hadn't just felt the bond breaking. I had felt with absolute clarity what Jaehan felt at the moment of blocking, what the room felt like, the weight of Shin Do-hyun's words, the specific texture of wounded pride overriding everything else. I had felt it from inside him, the way you only feel your own experience, not observed from outside but lived. And I understood in the way that certainty arrives sometimes without evidence. I can do that now. To anyone. I can make them feel what I felt. I pressed my fingers to the bond mark. It was warm, steady, a low, constant hum, different from before. Less a receiver now and more a transmitter, something that had been rewired in the breaking and the return. I had no idea of its limits. I had no idea what it would cost me. I knew, with the calm of someone who has already died once tonight and found it less final than expected, that I was about to find out. I turned off every light in the apartment at 10:47 p.m. Not because I needed darkness, but because they expected to find it this way. They expected the lights to be cut from outside, the Omega startled and disoriented, scrambling in the sudden dark. I wanted to be waiting in the dark already. I wanted the darkness to be mine. I moved through the apartment with the lights off and found, to my own slight surprise, that I could navigate it perfectly. 42 floors of city light came through every window, painting everything in shades of golden shadow. And I had lived in these rooms long enough to know them by texture. The slight give of the living room rug under my feet, the cool marble of the hallway, the particular silence of the bedroom where the windows faced north and the light was different, softer, blue-edged. I positioned myself in the hallway, equidistant between the balcony and the service entrance. I put one hand on my stomach. "I know you can hear me," I said quietly. To the babies, to the three of them, still and listening in their particular ways. "I need you to be calm. I need you to trust me." The restless one pressed against my ribs, subsided. "Good," I said. I waited. At 11:03 p.m., the balcony latch lifted. They came in the same order, same configuration, one from the balcony, two from the service entrance, the approach designed to cut off both exits. Professional. Was efficient. The same play, run twice because the first time it had worked. Except the first time, I hadn't known it was coming. The first figure through the balcony door stopped when he saw me standing in the hallway. I watched him recalibrate, saw the slight adjustment of stance. Not alarm exactly, more a recalculation. He'd expected me in the living room, probably on the sofa, phone in hand, calling numbers that wouldn't answer. Instead, I was standing in the middle of the dark hallway, with my arms at my sides and my eyes tracking him, with what I suspected was an expression he hadn't anticipated on a pregnant Omega. "You came back," I said. He said nothing, moved forward. His partners materialized from the service entrance hallway. The same three, same black clothes, same covered faces. The lead one, the one who had spoken before, the one whose voice I now recognized with the particular clarity of a memory that had been experienced at the end of a life, stopped 2 meters from me. "This doesn't have to be difficult," he said. "No," I agreed, "it doesn't." I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, "I want you to know something before this ends. I called my alphas 7 times tonight. 7 times while you were—" I stopped, breathed. They blocked my number. They chose not to know what was happening to me. The man tilted his head, waiting for whatever point I was making. "I'm telling you that," I said, because I want you to understand that what I'm about to do, I'm not doing it because someone is coming to save me. I'm doing it because no one is. And I decided somewhere in the last 2 hours that I'm finished waiting to be saved. I stepped forward, and he reached for me. I let him touch my wrist, his hand closing around it, grip professional and practiced and certain, and I felt the bond mark ignite, not burning, opening, like a door that had been locked from the inside suddenly swinging wide. And I pushed. The sound he made was not a scream. It was something worse than a scream. The sound a person makes when the nervous system receives information it has no framework for, when the body is forced to experience something that didn't happen to it as if it happened to it right now, in real time, without preparation or context. He experienced 47 seconds of dying. My dying. The cold marble. The spreading warmth that was blood. The bond mark screaming. Reaching for a phone that showed contact blocked on 3 separate attempts. When the specific grief of a person who has called for help and received silence. The last thought about 3 lives that hadn't yet taken their first breath. 47 seconds. He collapsed. His grip released my wrist. He went down sideways. Not dramatically, just suddenly, the way a structure fails when the load-bearing element is removed. His body hit the hallway floor and he curled into himself, gasping, hands pressing against his own chest, as if checking for wounds that weren't there. But he felt them. I knew he felt them. The second man reached me faster. No hesitation, pure training response. His hand caught my shoulder. I turned and looked at him and put my hand against his face. I won't describe each one in detail. I'll say only this. When it was over, all 3 of them were on the floor of my hallway, and none of them were dead. And that was my choice, not my limitation. I could feel through the bond mark that I had enough left for more. But death felt too easy. Death felt like letting them put it down. I wanted them to carry it instead. I stood in the hallway and looked at what I had done. My hand was shaking slightly. The babies were moving, all 3 of them, restless and alert, responding to the adrenaline or the bond mark's activation, or some instinct of their own that I didn't yet have words for. I know, I whispered to them. I know. It's okay. We're okay. From the kitchen counter, Hyo Jin's voice. Jihan, Jihan, are you? I'm okay, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Very calm, very level, like something had been burned clean. Call the Quan main line. Tell them to send cleanup to the apartment. Don't tell them anything else. Jihan, please, I said. A pause. Okay. I looked at the 3 men on my hallway floor. The leader was still conscious, barely, eyes open, staring at the ceiling with the expression of someone who had just had their entire understanding of omegas restructured from the inside. Who sent you? I said. This time it was a question. He told me. The words came out broken and immediate. No hesitation, no calculation. Whatever I had put inside him had taken the architecture of his resistance and quietly dismantled it. Shinwall Group. A name I recognized. A name the Quan triplets had been circling for 2 years without being able to get close enough to strike. And Chansu, I said. Oh, Chansu, he gave you the codes. The man's eyes moved to me. Something in them. Not quite guilt, not quite remorse, but the cousin of both. He contacted us, the man said. His voice was raw. 6 weeks ago. Said the pregnancy made the Quans vulnerable. Said you were... He stopped. Say it, I said quietly. The only leverage that mattered. The only thing they do anything to protect? I looked at him for a long moment. He was right, I said. They would have done anything, if they'd known. I stepped over him and walked to the kitchen. I picked up my phone. Hyujin's call still running, her end gone quiet in the way of someone holding their breath. And I looked at the time. 11:31 p.m. The banquet would run until at least 1 a.m. They'd be home after that, flushed with the success of the Shin merger, smelling of imported whiskey and satisfaction, calling my name as they came through the door. Jihan? Jihan, baby. Hey, we're home. Told you we'd be back. I pressed my fingers to the bond mark. I could feel them. Distant warm, the triple thread hum of 3 alphas moving through the world at the end of a triumphant evening. Jaehan's particular frequency, controlled satisfaction, the emotion of a man who has proven what he set out to prove. Jaeseo's something quieter, a note that didn't quite harmonize with the others, something unsettled. Jaeun's warm and slightly tired, the ease of someone coasting toward home. None of them knew. None of them felt the death that had happened in this apartment tonight because the bond had been blocked before the severance could transmit. They were going to walk through that door and find me standing in the kitchen, and the apartment would look. I looked at the hallway, 3 men on the floor, and the apartment otherwise untouched. I had been careful this time to not overturn furniture, not scatter evidence of a fight. I'd stood in the hallway and I'd waited, and I'd let them come to me. The Quan cleanup crew would arrive within the hour. They would remove the 3 men, restore the apartment, file whatever reports needed filing, with whatever authorities the Quan syndicate kept in its pocket. By the time the Alphas got home, the physical evidence would be gone. That left only me. I thought about going to the banquet. I thought about walking into that room, dressed, composed, our children safe inside me, the memory of my own death 40 minutes behind me, and finding them at that table, flushed with their success and smiling at them. The specific smile of a person who knows something no one else in the room knows. Hey, how did it go? I would ask. And they would tell me. And they wouldn't know. And I would know everything. I thought about what that would feel like. Then I thought, let them have tonight. Let them have this one last night of not knowing what their choice cost, what the silence cost, what the block number cost. Because tomorrow, or the day after, or whenever the time came, I would tell them, and they would have to live with it. And that knowledge, unlike anything else I could give them, would last. I cleaned the kitchen, I remade the sofa. I replaced the ceramic plate of Korean pear with a fresh one. The original had been knocked to the floor somewhere in the second confrontation, shattered across the marble. I did not replace Chansu's note. That I kept in my pocket. At 12:15 a.m., I heard the elevator, and I heard their voices in the hallway. Low, satisfied, Jaeun laughing at something, Jaehan's quieter response, Jaeseo saying nothing, which was Jaeseo's way of being present. The door opened. Light flooded in from the hallway. Jaeun's voice first. Jihan! Baby, where? He stopped when he saw me standing in the kitchen, and something crossed his face. Relief, warmth, the smile that always arrived before he could decide whether to let it. Hey, you waited up. Couldn't sleep, I said. Jaehan came in behind him. His eyes moved over me in that automatic alpha assessment, checking, cataloging, the deep-wired instinct to read his Omega's physical state. He found nothing alarming, which was the point. You look tired, he said. Third trimester, I said. Something moved across his face, a flicker, guilt almost, shown the specific guilt of someone who had done something they're not sure they want to acknowledge yet. His hand moved toward his jacket pocket and away again. Jaeseo was last through the door. He looked at me and didn't say anything for a moment. Just looked, the way he always did, with those careful eyes running their quiet calculations. I met his gaze and smiled. He didn't smile back. His eyes dropped briefly to the bond mark on my neck, then back to my face. Something in his expression said, something is different. I kept smiling. How did it go? I asked. I let Jaeun tell the story. He was good at stories, the particular gift of someone who had spent a lifetime being the warmth in a room of cold men who understood that narrative was its own kind of power. He described the Shin patriarch's face when Jaehan named the final terms. Hamas, he did an impression of the chief counsel's expression that made me produce a laugh. Genuine, which surprised me because I hadn't expected genuine to be available to me tonight. We sat in the living room, them still in their suits, me in the oversized shirt I'd been wearing all evening. Our babies shifting between us as Jaeun sat beside me, with both hands resting on my stomach, narrating events to the bump with the earnest commitment of someone who genuinely believed in early vocal development. Jaehan had poured himself a glass of water and stood near the windows, looking out at the city. His reflection showed me the side of his face, the angle he wore when he was processing something, when the performance of the evening was falling away, and whatever lived underneath it was reasserting itself. He hadn't touched me yet. In 2 years, Jaehan had never come home without touching me first. His hand on my shoulder, my cheek, the back of my neck. A brief, almost unconscious claim. I'm home. You're here. Tonight he stood at the window and drank his water and didn't cross the room. He knows something is wrong, I thought. He doesn't know what, but he knows. Jaiseo was on my other side, not touching either, though he sat close enough that I could feel his warmth. He'd undone the top button of his shirt, his one concession to the end of an evening, and was looking at his own hands in his lap with the particular focus of someone not actually looking at his hands. Jaiseo ya, I said. He looked up. You're quiet. I'm always quiet, he said. You're quieter than your version of quiet. Something crossed his face, the expression of a man being accurately observed by someone he loves, which is always slightly uncomfortable. Long night, he said. Yes, I agreed. It was. His eyes went to the bond mark again. I saw it. The same brief check, the same slight furrow. He was feeling something through the bond that didn't match what he was looking at. The bond mark was different. I had felt it myself. Since the rewind, since the activation, it hummed at a different frequency. Still connected, still intact, but changed. The way a scar sits differently than unmarked skin. He knew something had shifted. He didn't know what. Not yet, I thought. Soon. Ojeon had moved on from the birth canal acoustics research to asking the babies which of their names they preferred. They'd chosen 3, one for each, and I watched his face while he did it. The total unguarded openness of him, the way Jaeon had never learned to be anything other than exactly what he felt. He'd been the last one to hold my face before they left tonight. He'd kissed my stomach and promised to be home before the babies kicked again. He'd also said nothing when Jaehan's thumb moved across that screen. I'd felt his thread through the bond in that moment, in the last few seconds before the blocking, before the connection muted. His frequency had carried something that I now recognized as wrong. This is wrong. And then nothing, because the bond was blocked. And then 47 minutes later, nothing, because I was dead. However, he hadn't stopped it. I looked at his hands on my stomach and felt something complicated. Love and grief and a particular tenderness for a person whose goodness had failed to outweigh his silence. How do you love someone through that, I thought. I didn't have the answer yet, but I thought I might, eventually, if they gave me reason to. Come to bed, Jaeon said, turning to look at me with that easy smile. You need to sleep. In a minute, I said. I looked at Jaehan's reflection in the window. Jaehan, I said. He turned. Come sit with me, I said. He crossed the room, sat on the edge of the coffee table facing the sofa. Close, but not beside me, which was also notable, as if he was maintaining the option of distance. I looked at him for a moment, the sharpness of his face in the low lamplight, on the bond mark on his neck, the silver crescent that matched mine, that had matched Jihan's, mine. Focus. Did anything happen tonight, I said, that you want to tell me about? He was very still. We finalized the Shin merger, he said. Not that, I said. Silence. Jaeon had gone still beside me. Jaeseo's head had lifted. Jaehan's jaw tightened. That familiar motion, the one that preceded either honesty or deflection, and it could go either way with him. Always. He stopped, started again. I blocked your number. During the banquet. I should have. He stopped again. I waited. Park Do-yoon made a comment, he said. About. His eyes moved away from mine. About an alpha whose omega calls during business. And I was. He set his water glass down on the coffee table with a small, controlled click. I was angry. At him. And I took it out on. His jaw tightened again. I'm sorry, Jahan. The apology landed in the room like a stone. I looked at him. I know, I said. I should have. I know, I said again, more quietly. The thing about I know in response to an apology is that it refuses to absorb the guilt. It returns it to the person who generated it and says, you carry this. Jaehan heard that. I watched him hear it. Something in his expression shifted from contrition to the more difficult territory of a man sitting with a consequence he can't fix with an apology. Good. Sit with it. Sleep, I said, and stood up. All of you, you've had a long night. I walked to the bedroom. I didn't look back to see their faces. I already knew what I'd find there. Three men who loved me, carrying three different shapes of guilt, you in an apartment that had been cleaned of every trace of what tonight had actually cost, except the note in my pocket and the changed frequency in my bond mark and the memory that would live in me now for the rest of my life. I died in this apartment tonight, and I came back alone, and you were celebrating. I pressed my hand flat against my stomach and felt three small lives moving in the dark, and I breathed and I let the night end. 3 days passed. I let them pass in the deliberate way you allow something to settle. Not avoidance, but calibration. I needed to understand what I was carrying before I could decide what to put down and what to keep. The bond mark had fully stabilized into its new frequency by the second morning. I'd spent an hour in the bathroom with the door locked, fingers pressed to the crescent, mapping the change, the way a person inventories damage after an accident, cataloging what is broken and what has healed differently. The receiving capacity was unchanged. I could still feel them, all three threads, distinct and present. Jahan's controlled cool, the particular emotional architecture of a man who expends enormous energy managing how much of himself reaches other people. Jaseo's steadiness, which I now understood, was not the absence of feeling, but its very deliberate containment. Jeon's warmth, which ran closer to the surface than either of his brothers, and which had been running with a subtle undercurrent of something's wrong since the night of the banquet. The transmitting capacity was new. It sat in the bond mark like a second heartbeat, present, available, waiting. I'd felt it activate once since that night, and when a delivery man had put his hand on my arm in the building lobby, with a grip slightly too firm, and something in me had surged. Not threatening, not defensive, just aware, ready. I'd removed his hand from my arm myself, and that had been sufficient. But the capacity was there. Permanent, I thought. Something the rewind had installed rather than removed. The question of Chansu. I had the note in my pocket. I had his name from the leader of the attack team. The man I had chosen not to kill, who was now, according to the Quan cleanup crew's quiet reports, in a private facility that the Quan syndicate maintained for people who required indefinite hospitality. I had the security log I'd accessed myself from Jahan's system the morning after. The timestamp showing the service entrance code entered at 10:31 p.m., 23 minutes before the attack. Oh, Chansu, entry code 10:31 p.m. I had not told the alphas. I had not told anyone except Yojin, who had listened for 2 hours while I explained everything, and then said very quietly, "What do you need?" rather than, "What are you going to do?" Which was why I loved her. What I needed, I told her, was time to decide how to deliver this. Because the delivery mattered. This wasn't information I could hand to Jahan and step back from. The moment they knew, the situation would become theirs. Their rage, their grief, their process of revenge. And I had learned, at a cost I would not fully calculate for some time, what happened when I was removed from my own story. When the thing that threatened me was handled by other people's priorities, other people's timing, on other people's choice of when to answer and when to block. This time I controlled the narrative. It was on the third morning that JCO found me. I was in the kitchen at 6 a.m., early, before the others woke, the particular stillness of the apartment in the hour when Seoul had not yet committed to the day, and the Han River light was still gray-pink and uncertain through the windows. I was eating the pear I'd been craving for 3 weeks and reading through security reports on my tablet. Information the cleanup crew had compiled on the Shinwol group, on Chansu's communications over the past 6 weeks, on the financial trail from Chansu's accounts to a shell company registered in Busan. I'd been building the file for 3 days. Jae-seo appeared in the kitchen doorway, dressed but with the slightly unmoored look of someone who'd been awake for longer than his appearance suggested. He stopped when he saw me. The tablet, the reports, the deliberate posture of someone who was not surprised to be found here and was not performing casualness. He crossed to the kitchen island and sat down across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "You're not sleeping well," he said. "I'm sleeping fine," I said. You're up at 6 a.m. reading security reports. I'm interested in our security. I held his gaze. Given recent events, something shifted in his expression. The careful calibration of a man who has been waiting for a conversation and is not sure whether this is the beginning of it or not. Jihan, he said. The bondmark. I waited. It feels different, he said. I noticed it the night we came home. It's been... He pressed his fingers briefly to his own bondmark. The mirror image of mine. It's not bad. It's not wrong. It just... He searched for the word. It changed. Something changed. Yes, I said. What happened while we were at the banquet? I looked at him for a long moment. He was the one who hesitated before Jahan blocked my number. He was the one whose thread through the bond had carried wrong. This is wrong. He was the one who'd come home and looked at me with those calculating eyes and known immediately that I was different, that something had shifted, that the person who handed him a smile in the kitchen doorway at 12:30 a.m. was not entirely the same person who'd stood at the window watching their taillights disappear. He'd known for 3 days. He'd been waiting for me to be ready. That, I thought, whereas why he is the hardest one. Sit down, Jasoya, I said. I'll make tea. I didn't tell him everything that morning. I told him enough. I told him that someone had come into the apartment while they were at the banquet. I told him the security system had been disabled from the inside. I watched his face as that landed, the precise moment he understood the implication, the slight whitening around his jaw. I told him I had handled it. I did not tell him about dying. Not yet. That information I had decided needed to be delivered to all three of them simultaneously. It was not something that should be carried by one person before the others knew. It would change the architecture of their relationships with each other in ways I couldn't predict and didn't want to engineer. I told him about Chansu, and I slid the folded note across the kitchen island. He looked at it. For when you're hungry, rest well tonight. He recognized the handwriting immediately. I watched recognition arrive on his face, followed immediately by something that was not quite nausea but was adjacent to it. The specific physical response of a person whose understanding of a relationship they trusted is being reorganized in real time. Chansu, he said. The name came out flat, drained of the warmth it had always carried. He gave them the codes, I said. The balcony entry, the service entrance, the panic button override, all of it. Jaso's hands were flat on the island, very still. When did you... I accessed the security logs the morning after, I said. I have a full file. Financial trail, communications, and the contact he made with the Shinwell group 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks, Jaso said. While he was bringing me chamomile tea, I said. While he was asking how the babies were kicking. Something moved across Jaso's face that I had never seen there before. A crack in the containment, brief and immediately controlled, but visible. Pain. Not the calculated pain of strategic thinking, the human kind. Jaseo, I said. He looked at me. I need you to understand something, I said. I'm going to tell you and your brothers everything, all of it. But I'm going to do it on my terms, in my time. And when I do, I held his gaze. I need you to let me finish before anyone moves. His jaw was tight. Jihan, promise me, I said. A long pause. Okay, he said. I promise. I nodded. I picked up my tea. Don't tell them yet, I said. And I'll do it tonight. He looked at me for another moment, those careful eyes running their calculations, reading my face for something I wasn't sure I was giving him. You've been carrying this alone for 3 days, he said. Yes, I said. While we... Yes, I said again, quieter. He looked down at the note on the island. Something in him went very still. I'm sorry, he said. Not about Chansu. The apology was larger than Chansu. I could feel it in the bond. The particular weight of it, the specific grief of a person who is beginning to understand that their silence was a choice, and choices have costs. I know, I said. And then, because I was tired and because Jaiseo had always been the one who sat with things rather than resolving them prematurely. Drink your tea, Jaiseo, ya. We'll do the hard part tonight. He picked up his cup. We sat in the early morning light and drank tea and didn't speak. And outside, the Han River caught the sunrise and fractured it, and our babies moved in the patient, unknowing way of lives that had not yet entered the world's complications. And somewhere across the city, Oh Chan-su was doing whatever people do in the morning when they have not yet been found out. Tonight, I thought. Tonight, everything changes. I called them together at 8 p.m. The living room, all three of them. Jae-han off the phone for once, setting it face up on the coffee table with the deliberateness of a man making a point he didn't explain. Jae-seo on the far end of the sectional, already knowing the shape of what was coming, even if not its full dimensions. His stillness carrying that particular quality of braced attention. Jae-yoon between them, why reading the room with the instinctive social awareness that always operated beneath his warmth, and visibly understanding that this was not a comfortable conversation. I stood. I'd decided on that deliberately, standing while they sat. Not for dominance, for visibility. I wanted them to be able to see my face for all of it. I'm going to tell you what happened while you were at the banquet on Tuesday, I said. I'm going to tell you all of it. I need you to let me finish. Jaehan's eyes were on me, that focused, locked-on quality of his attention when he had identified something as requiring his full processing capacity. Okay, Jaehan said quietly. I started with Chan-su. I told him about the note. For when you're hungry, rest well tonight. And I took it from my pocket and set it on the coffee table where they could see it. I told them about the security log, the timestamp, the entry code. I told them what the lead attacker had told me 6 weeks ago, the contact, the argument that the pregnancy made the Kwans vulnerable, that I was the only leverage that mattered. I watched their faces as they understood. Joyoon's expression, the specific journey of it, confusion, then the first shape of understanding, then something that crossed his face fast and bright like pain, and then a stillness that was not his natural stillness, but the stillness of something shutting down in self-protection. Jaehan was very still. His jaw was tight in that way that meant he was not allowing himself to react until he had the full picture. Jae-seo was looking at his hands. He already knew this part. What he was doing now was waiting for the rest. There were 3 of them, I said. Ooh, they came through the balcony and the service entrance simultaneously. The panic button had been disabled. Building security was offline. I tried calling. I paused. All 3 of you. A silence. Contact blocked, I said. Jaehoon made a sound. Small, involuntary, quickly swallowed. I want to be precise about the sequence, I said, because the sequence matters. I called Jaehan first. Voicemail, then Jae-seo, voicemail, then Jaehoon, straight to voicemail, which meant the contact block had already been applied. I understood what that meant. I held Jaehan's gaze. I understood that you had made a choice. Jaehan's voice was tight. Let me finish, I said. He stopped. I fought, I said. I want you to know that. I used the lamp, bought myself time to reach the panic button. It didn't work. I tried the building security desk. No answer. I called Hyo-jin. She stayed on the line. I fought as long as I could. I took a breath. And then I didn't. The room went completely still. One of them had a knife, I said. I was on the floor. I was reaching for my phone. I stopped. I was trying to call Jaehoon one more time. Jaehoon's hands were pressed flat against his thighs. His head was down. I died, I said. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped from a great height. On the floor of our bedroom, with my phone in my hand and 3 blocked contacts and our children inside me. Jaehan's face had gone completely white. And then I touched the bondmark. Something happened. I don't have complete language for it. The bondmark, when it began to sever, when the connection started to break, something activated. Something I didn't know I had. On our time, I searched for the right word. Time reset. I woke up on the sofa 2 hours before the attack. Our children were safe. I remembered everything. You, Jae-seo's voice very quiet. You rewound. Yes. And then they came again, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. And this time I was ready. I called Hyo-jin. I positioned myself. And when they came, I pressed my fingers to the bondmark. Something else activated, something the near death had unlocked. I can transmit sensation through the bondmark, not just receive, transmit. I made them feel what I had felt, what I felt dying, the cold floor, the blocked numbers, all of it. Nobody moved. They're in your facility, I said to Jehan. The cleanup crew took them. They'll tell you everything they know about the Shinwol group, and they'll tell it willingly. And I made sure of that. I set the security report on the coffee table beside Chansu's note. The financial trail, the communications log, the full timeline of his contact with Shinwol Group. 6 weeks, 3 days, and I found the relevant page. 14 hours before Tuesday night, he entered the balcony code into their system for testing purposes. I looked at Jaehyun. He asked how the babies were kicking on Tuesday morning, I said. When he brought me tea, he looked at the ultrasound photo on the refrigerator. Jaehyun's breath came out in a sound that was not quite a word. I know, I said quietly. I sat down. Finally. The standing had been the right choice. I felt it in my body. The particular tiredness of having held a posture for a long time that was necessary but not natural. I sat and I put both hands on my stomach and I looked at the three of them. I've been carrying this for 3 days, I said. I'm done carrying it alone. What happened next is not a thing I have precise words for. Jaehan was the first to break. He stood, fast, the motion of a person whose body's moving before the mind is caught up, and crossed to the window, his back to the room, both hands pressed flat against the glass. His reflection showed me his face, and what was on it was not the expression I'd expected. Not rage, not the calculating cold of an alpha identifying a threat and moving to eliminate it. It was grief. Raw, unguarded, the specific grief of a person who has understood, completely and without defense, what their choice cost. You called 7 times, he said. His voice was strange, stripped of its usual authority, down to something much quieter underneath. I blocked you and you... He stopped. While I was raising a glass, I said, not unkindly. I know. Jihan. He turned, and for the first time in 2 years, I saw Kwon Jaehan's face without the architecture of control over it. Just the face underneath, which was the face of a person in genuine agony. I'm sorry, I know, I said, for the 3rd time. That's not enough. No, I agreed, it isn't. He looked at me, and I let him look. Let him sit in the fact of what I know meant, not forgiveness, not yet, not automatically, but acknowledgement. I see you. I see what you did. I see that you know what you did. And that knowledge now belongs to you permanently. Jiun's hands were on his face. I moved to him, slowly, with the particular deliberateness of 7 months pregnant and a body that had recently been through more than I would tell them the physical details of for some time. I sat beside him and I put my hand on his arm. He looked up. His eyes were wet. The shock of it was visible on his face. Jaehyun, who cried at ultrasounds, who narrated to my stomach, who had kissed me goodbye with both hands warm and certain, was looking at me with the expression of someone confronting the gap between who they believe they are and what they actually did. I felt it, he said. When Jaehan, he swallowed. I felt it through the bond. I knew it was wrong. You didn't stop it, I said. No. Why? He was quiet for a long time. I don't know, he said finally. That's the worst part. I don't know. His voice broke. So I looked away. I held his gaze. Don't do that again, I said. He nodded, hands pressing against his eyes. Jaso had not moved from his end of the sofa. He was looking at the security report, not reading it, just looking at it, at the timestamp, at Oh Chan-su's name printed in clean black text above the entry log. He was mine, Jaso said. I looked at him. I hired him. I ran his background. I cleared him for household security. His voice was very flat. He was my hire. Yes, I said. I should have. You couldn't have known, I said. 6 weeks ago, none of us knew. He performed his role perfectly for 11 months. I should have trusted the bond, Joseo said. Tuesday night, I felt... He pressed his hand to his bond mark. I felt something wrong. Before Jaehan blocked you. I should have said something. Yes, I said. What you should have. No softening. No, but it's okay or you couldn't have known. I let it stand. Yes, you should have. Because Jaseo needed the precise truth more than he needed comfort, and because comfort that smoothed over the real thing would not serve either of us. He looked at me. Thank you, he said quietly. I looked at him. For not softening it, he said. I'm done softening things, I said. The footage came from the security system's backup. I hadn't known about the backup. It was a redundancy Jahan had installed 18 months ago. A separate server, off-site, that archived everything regardless of whether the primary system was online or disabled. The backup server couldn't be reached through the apartment system, which was why Shan Su's disabling of the primary hadn't touched it. Jahan found it the morning after I told him. He came to me in the kitchen at 7 a.m., and the expression on his face was one I had never seen before in Kwan Jahan. A kind of controlled devastation, the face of a man who has watched something he cannot unwatch and is now standing in its aftermath. There's footage, he said. I set down my tea. From Tuesday, he said. The backup server, he stopped. It has everything. How much is everything? His jaw worked. All of it. I understood. I had known in some abstract way that this might exist. A record of what had happened in this apartment on Tuesday night. Both timelines. The first one and the second one. The rewind would show on a camera as, what does it look like? I asked. The rewind. On the footage. Like, he searched. Like a cut in film. And the recording runs normally, and then there's he pressed his fingers to the space between his eyes. A white flash, and then it runs backward for 2 hours and starts again. I nodded. I need you to watch it, I said. He looked at me. All three of you, I said. Together. I won't be there. I've already lived it. I don't need to watch it. But you need to see it. Not just hear about it from me. See it. A pause. Jihan? I'm not asking you to watch it as punishment, I said. I'm asking you to watch it because you need to understand what you're carrying. What we're carrying. You can't make a choice about what comes next if you only have my words. You need to know what your choice looked like. He was quiet for a long moment. Okay, he said. I left the apartment while they watched it. I took the elevator down and walked out into the gray morning soul air and sat on a bench near the building entrance with my hands on my stomach and listened to the city wake up around me. Delivery trucks, a convenience store 3 buildings down with its accordion door rattling open, a couple walking a dog, the dog pulling ahead, the couple following in the companionable silence of 2 people who have been tired together for a long time. I sat there for 47 minutes. When I came back upstairs, Jayan was sitting on the hallway floor outside the apartment door. He was not crying. He was past crying. Whatever had been inside him had already moved through and left something quieter in its place. He was sitting with his back against the wall and his knees drawn up and his eyes on the middle distance. He looked up when I stepped off the elevator. I sat down beside him on the hallway floor. We didn't speak for a while. He tries to call, Jayon said finally. His voice was rough. In the first one, on the footage. He tries to call all 3 of us, and I know, I said. And I know. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth. How do you, he stopped. How are you? I'm not okay, I said simply. I'm not pretending to be okay. I died in this apartment while you were drinking whiskey and accepting congratulations. That's a real thing that happened. It doesn't unhappen because I came back. No, he said. But I came back, I said, and our children are safe. And I'm choosing to be here and to have this conversation instead of, I paused, being instead of the other options. What were the other options? He asked quietly. I looked at the hallway wall. I thought about leaving, I said, after the rewind, while you were still at the banquet. I thought about taking what I knew about Chansu and the Shinwol group and the security system and just, I pressed my hand to my stomach, going somewhere you couldn't be late to. The silence this left was enormous. Why didn't you? He asked. I thought about it. Because I'm not done, I said finally. Because what we have, what the 5 of us have, our children, them, isn't finished. And I wanted to give you the chance to understand what you did before I decided what to do with it. Jayon turned to look at me. He stopped. That's more generous than we deserved. Probably, I said. He made a sound. Something between a laugh and its opposite. The apartment door opened. Jahan stood in the doorway, and when he saw us both on the floor, he didn't say anything. He looked at Jaeun. He looked at me, and then Kwan Jahan, who had never in my memory lowered himself to a floor for any reason, sat down against the opposite wall. He put his face in his hands. Jaeseo appeared behind him in the doorway, took in the tableau. Jayan and me against one wall, Jahan against the other, the hallway between us, and sat down beside Jahan. For a long time, nobody spoke. Jihan Jahan said finally. His voice was muffled, hands still over his face. I watched you reach for your phone. His hands lowered, his eyes were red. In the first timeline, on the footage, you were on the floor and you were still reaching for... His jaw clamped. For us. Yes, I said. And we were... Yes. I blocked you, he said. The words fell out of him like something he'd been holding by force and had finally let go. I blocked you because Park Do-hyun made me feel small, and I took it out on you. And while I was proving I wasn't controlled by my Omega, I was dying, I said. Yes. Because of Chon-soo, yes, I said. But Chon-soo needed one thing from you. He needed you not to answer. He needed the block. Jahan looked at me. He built his entire plan around the assumption that your pride was reliable, I said. That if someone embarrassed you at the right moment, you would choose status over instinct. And he was right. The silence that followed was the most difficult one yet. He was right, Jahan said. Yes. That's what I have to live with, he said. Yes, I said. It is. I looked at all three of them. I'm not leaving, I said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not leaving because I don't want to go. What I want is... I pressed both hands to my stomach. I want you to understand, completely and permanently, that the bond is not something you manage when it's convenient. It's not something you silence when it interferes. It is the most important call you will ever receive, and if you ever mistake it for a distraction again, we won't, Jaeun said. Jihan, I promise. Don't promise me tonight, I said. You're in the feeling of it right now. I need the promise 6 months from now, when the feeling has faded and the business is complicated and someone makes a comment about an alpha who answers his omega. I need it then. None of them spoke. Then I'll stay, I said. Chun-soo was brought in 4 days later. I didn't ask to be there. I asked to be told every detail afterward, and they gave me that without negotiation, which was itself a shift, a small recalibration of how information in this household moved. What happened in the room where they brought him is not mine to describe. I know that Yaseo conducted the interview. I know that Jahan was present but did not speak. I know that Jaeun left the room once and returned. I know the full scope of Chon-soo's arrangement with Shinwol Group came out, and the further layers beneath it, the specific person within Shinwol who had identified me as the optimal pressure point, who had determined that eliminating me would fracture the Kwan triplets' unity, was the who had bet everything on an alpha's pride being weaponizable. They had been right about that bet. They had not accounted for what I would turn out to be. I sat in the kitchen while they were in that room, and I thought about chamomile tea, about the particular warmth of being cared for by someone you trust, the small daily rituals of safety, this temperature, those lamps for when you're hungry, that you don't notice until they're revealed as instruments. Did he mean any of it, I thought? The tea, the sidelights, the note? I didn't know. I thought perhaps both things could be true. That he had performed care and also, somewhere in the performance, found something real. That people who betray us are not always purely cold. That sometimes the warmth is real and the knife is also real, and both of them belong to the same person. And the living with that is its own long work. When they came back, Jae-han sat across from me at the kitchen island and told me everything. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I nodded. The Shinwol Group, I said. We'll handle it, Jae-han said. I know, I said. I want to be part of that decision. A pause. Jihan, not the execution, I said. The decision. I want to know what you're planning, what the options are, what the risks are. I want to be in the room. He looked at me for a long moment. Okay, he said. That one word, Okay from Kwan Jehan, who had never in 2 years offered me a seat at that table, landed differently than anything else he'd said in the past week. It landed like something that had shifted permanently, like a door that had been stuck and was now moving freely. Thank you, I said. And there is a particular kind of intimacy that follows a crisis. Not the honeymoon of reunion, not the artificial sweetness of guilt-motivated tenderness, but something quieter and more structural. The intimacy of two people who have seen each other's worst and are choosing to stay in the same room anyway. That's what the weeks after were like. Jehan stopped going to bed before me. He'd had the habit in the past of finishing whatever he was working on regardless of the hour. I'd often fallen asleep alone and woken to find him in the early hours, still dressed at his desk. Now he came to bed, not with announcements or explanations, just he came to bed. Jaseo started leaving his door open. This is a small thing, and his office door had always been closed when he was working, a signal that carried through the apartment as clearly as language. I am in a place you should not enter uninvited. Now it was open. I would pass it in the evenings and hear the low sounds of his work, papers, keyboard, the occasional call. And sometimes he would look up and we would exchange a look that contained nothing specific, but also everything. I see you. You see me. Jaeun was the most changed and the least changed simultaneously. He was still warm, still narrated to my stomach, still arrived at bedtime with the energy of someone who treated sleep as a collaborative project. But the warmth had a new texture, less the performance of someone who was always determined to be the easiest presence in the room, and more the genuine expression of someone who had decided that ease was not something they were entitled to by default, but something worth earning. I looked away, he'd said. Don't do that again. Okay, he'd said. He hadn't. 3 weeks after the banquet, I woke at 4 a.m. to the particular insistence of 3 babies making their midnight complaints known, and found Jaso sitting in the nursing chair we'd placed in the corner of the bedroom. Still dressed, a book open in his lap, reading by the light of his phone screen. Why are you in here? I said, not fully awake. He looked up. I couldn't sleep. So you came in here? Yes. I looked at him in the dim light. The book in his lap, a volume on prenatal development, I noticed, which he'd apparently obtained at some point in the past weeks and had been working through with the systematic dedication he applied to everything. Jeso ya, I said. I'm not gone, I said. He looked up. I came back, I said. I'm here. They're here. I pressed my hand to my stomach. You don't have to watch in the dark. Something in his face, that crack again, the one I'd seen in the kitchen the morning after, the one that appeared only in unguarded moments. I know, he said, but you're watching anyway. Yes. I looked at him for a moment. Come here then, I said. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. Not touching, not yet. That precise, respectful distance he always maintained until invited past it. I took his hand. He looked at our hands. Are I almost? He stopped. I know, I said, but you didn't lose us. We're here. His fingers tightened around mine. I should have said something, he said. That night, when I felt it was wrong, I should have. Yes, I said. You should have. I paused. And next time you will. Next time, he said. There won't be a next time like that one, I said. But there will be times when saying the thing is hard and the easier choice is silence. And I need you to choose the hard thing. Yes, he said. I know you can, I said. That's the difference between you and what you did that night. You're capable of more than that silence. I know it. He looked at me for a long moment. How are you? He stopped. Tried again. How are you this? I died, I said simply. And then I came back. And coming back did something. I touched the bond mark. Something changed. I'm not who I was before Tuesday, but I think I might be someone better. Someone who doesn't wait. He nodded slowly. Sleep, I said. Lie down. You don't have to watch from the chair. He lay down, still in his clothes on top of the covers, with the slightly careful quality of someone who wasn't sure they were entitled to this yet. I kept my hand in his. Outside, Seoul did its 4 a.m. things. The distant rumble of the first subway line starting its runs. A delivery truck somewhere below. The Han River invisible in the dark but present, always present, running through the city like a memory it couldn't let go of. The baby settled. Jaseo's breathing slowed. I lay in the dark and held his hand and thought, this is what survived, not unchanged, not unmarked, but present and warm and choosing every day to stay. That, I thought, is enough to work with. Epilogue. 6 weeks later, Jaehyun was telling our children about the Han River. He was narrating a description of Banquet Bridge at sunset, the fountain show, the colors, the way the water looked from the south bank, while all three of us occupied various levels of wakefulness on the bedroom floor. Jaehyun was fully committed to the bit. Jaehan had fallen asleep sitting against the foot of the bed, head tipped back, one hand resting on my ankle in the absent, unconscious way of someone whose body had decided proximity was non-negotiable even in sleep. Jaso was reading, cross-legged beside me, occasionally turning a page with the focused contentment of someone who was, for once, exactly where he decided to be. And I was lying on my back with both hands on my stomach and watching the ceiling and feeling the three of them move. The restless one, the calm one, the one who kicked when I was anxious. They weren't kicking now. And the thing about the South Bank, John was saying, is that you have to time it right, because the fountain only runs twice in the evening. But when it runs, John, I said, the light does this thing where it goes through the water and makes these. He paused. They're asleep, I said. He looked at my stomach. They're not asleep. They're engaged. They're 7.5 months old gestationally and not yet possessed of aesthetic appreciation for fountain light effects. You don't know that. I'm fairly confident. Jaso turned a page. He's been describing the Han River to them for 20 minutes, he said, without looking up. It's an important river, Jaehyun said with complete sincerity. I laughed. Real, unguarded. The kind that came from somewhere deeper than amusement. From the particular well of people who have been through something serious together and have found on the other side of it that laughter is still available, that it hasn't been consumed by the weight of what happened. Jaehan stirred at the sound. His head came up. He looked at me, and the expression that crossed his face just for a moment before he pulled himself back to wakefulness was one I filed carefully. Relief. The specific recurring relief of someone who keeps having to reconfirm that what they almost lost is still present. What did I miss? He said, voice rough. Jaehyun is educating our children about the Han River. Important subject, Jaehan said. Inaran lay back down with his hand back on my ankle. Jan resumed his narration. I looked at the ceiling and felt the bondmark. Warm, steady, its new frequency settled into something I was beginning to think of as mine. Not the old hum, not the half-suppressed signal of an omega who had been told in 100 subtle ways that his instincts were excessive. Something with weight, something that went both ways. I had a meeting scheduled with the Quan security team next Tuesday. My request granted without negotiation. A full audit of household protocols, the hiring process, the information architecture of who knew what and when. Jaehan had pulled in 3 of his most trusted people and told them, Jihan is leading this. Answer his questions completely. The Shinwall group situation was ongoing. Complex. I had been in 3 of those conversations which had been different, not comfortable, not what they were used to, but real. Oh, Chon-Su was in the facility. What happened next was a decision we were making together, which was new, which was not yet easy, which was the beginning of something rather than its resolution. I pressed my hand flat against my stomach. Hey, I said quietly, to the 3 of them inside me, under the cover of Jaehyun's Han River narration, in Jaeso's page turning, in Jaehan's hand on my ankle. Hey, I need you to know something. The restless one pressed against my ribs. What happened, I said very quietly, is not what you're coming into. That night, that was a before. This is an after. And in the after, things are different. The calm one settled lower, heavy and patient. Your fathers are not the men who blocked that call, I said. They're the men who watched the footage and sat in the hallway and came to bed and opened their doors and chose, every day, imperfectly, with the full weight of knowing what their choice cost, to be better. That's not nothing, I said. That's not everything either. But it's what we have. The anxious one kicked. I know, I said. I know. But we're still here. Joan had reached the part of his narration where he was describing the first time he'd taken me to the river, before the bond, before the pregnancies, before any of it, and his voice had shifted into something softer, the tone of someone accessing a memory they keep for warmth. And you said it looked fake, Joan was saying, laughing a little. You said no real river looks like that. It has to be edited. I stand by that, I said. It was sunset. It was real. It was suspiciously beautiful. That's just the Han River. Jehan made a sound that was probably a laugh, filtered through almost sleep. Jaso turned a page. I lay on the floor with my family arranged around me in the particular configurations of people who had learned, at significant cost, not to take this for granted. And I thought, we survived Tuesday. We are still here. Something was severed and something grew back. Different shaped, scarred, more honest. I pressed my hand to my stomach. 7 months and 3 weeks. Any day now, the doctor said. Any day. Jeon, I said. When they're born, I paused. When they're here, and they're asking questions about us, about how we work, and know about what it means to take care of something you love. Yeah. Tell them the truth, I said. All of it, including the part where you got it wrong. A long pause. Including that part, he said. Especially that part, I said, because that's the part that shows them what to do when they get it wrong too. That you don't disappear from the story. You stay and you fix it and you become someone better and you don't block the call. Silence. Then Jaehyun's voice, rough. Okay. Then Jae-seo, quiet. Okay. And Jae-han, from the edge of sleep, his hand warm on my ankle. Okay. Outside, Seoul kept its endless hours. The Han River ran through the dark. The bondmark hummed. Warm, changed, mine, transmitting and receiving in equal measure, the way it should have always been. And in the morning, the city would wake up, and so would we. And the work of after would continue, imperfect, necessary, alive. We were still here. That was enough. That was everything.